Greetings, everyone. It's now 2 after, so we'll go ahead and get started, and hopefully anybody who would like to join us will do so when they get the opportunity. Welcome to Pacific Oaks College, the last straw when movements shift from talk to action. We're going to talk today about advocacy and social justice and actually some of the things that it takes to really make movements happen, to ensure that individuals are actually getting the help, support, and assistance that we want to give them. Many of us have huge desires to impact the world in different ways, and we want to do that, but we sometimes don't know how. And so today's webinar is going to speak to efforts at making that happen and the ability and our abilities to affect true change and sometimes to actually get unstuck from being that conversationalist to actually moving and making changes and changes that last and that are sustainable. So welcome aboard for our journey. If you have any questions, I'll be paying attention to the chat function, so please feel free to type in any questions that you might have, and we will get started. Thank you so much for joining us. I will start off by attempting to advance the slide. There we go. Today's agenda, shifting from talk to action. First, we're going to talk a little bit about Pacific Oaks College so you can know who we are and what we stand for. We're going to move into conversations about advocacy as it relates to a little bit about media and social media, research, and then lobbying. We're going to talk about government structures and how the understanding of those structures influences your ability to be a helper and move your conversations to actual action. And then we're going to talk about following your dreams and getting invited to the table to do this work. And then we're going to end a little bit with some conversation about our degrees in advocacy and social justice. So again, don't hesitate to type a question into the chat box if you have any questions as we move through the program, and I'll do my best to address them as I see them come up. Pacific Oaks College has been around for decades, over 70 years, and our mission, we are grounded in a social justice heritage, and we prepare students to be culturally intelligent agents of change, serving diverse communities in the fields of human development, education, and family studies. We have 3 programs, 3 schools at the college, the School of Human Development, and I am Donald Grant, the Associate Dean of the School of Human Development. Inside the School of Human Development are housed the human development programs in addition to the advocacy and social justice programs. Our School of Education has both the master's and bachelor's degree programs with credentials and some without being credentialed. And then our School of Cultural and Family Psychology has its MFT program, and this fall we will actually be launching our community psychology degree program at the bachelor's degree level. Our core values are informed by Quaker principles. Pacific Oaks Children's School was built to bring an inclusive approach to early childhood education, teaching children to respect and embrace the differences that make others unique. Pacific Oaks College has expanded on this progressive approach to inform their approach to the fields of early childhood development, early childhood education, human development, cultural family psychology, and organizational leadership. We're guided by the core values of respect, diversity, social justice, and inclusion. We have been doing this work for many, many years as it relates to social justice and equity and inclusion, and ensuring that we are matriculating students and creating programs that do in fact take talk and move it into action. Our goal is to do our best to train professionals to be able to not just have theory and textbook knowledge, but to be able to move those things into an ecological framework that creates action. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today as it relates to this particular webinar topic. So many people ask, what is advocacy? How does advocacy work? And many of us have different ideas about how we want to create change and the different things that we would like to do as it relates to change. But sometimes we get stuck and we don't always know what to do. And part of that is because we don't always have a solid definition of what exactly advocacy is. What does it look like? How does it work? And some of the foundational factors as it relates. Well, advocacy is an activity by an individual or group which aims to influence decisions. Now, these decisions are oftentimes within the political system, an economic system, or a social system or institution. Oftentimes, our advocacy work is being dedicated to a particular population. Many times, our advocacy work is focused on a population for whom we have a great deal of passion for, whether that is related to children in foster care, whether that's related to ethnic groups and cultural traditions, whether that's related to LGBTQ groups. But also, the advocacy group is just one component. Oftentimes, the issues we focus on with these groups are really important. So, some people may focus advocacy work on youth as it relates to the school to prison pipeline, or on families as it relates to documentation status and the dismantling of families as a result of policies related to documentation. And one of the most important things about advocacy and being able to effectively advocate is being able to identify the specific populations to whom you want to direct your advocacy, but also to bring that group's voice into your conversation. One of the major challenges with advocacy is that many of us are unable to lose the paternalistic framework of advocacy, meaning that we identify help in a way that demonstrates what we feel that the community needs. But what's most important is that we hear the voice of that community. And even if we're a part of that community, we don't always have the best ability to know the needs of the entire community, because each community is diverse. Whether you're talking about one religious tradition, one cultural group, within that group there is a diversity, and there are diverse sets of needs as it relates. And when we talk about the influencing of decisions in the political arena, it's not just about laws and legislation. Although we'll talk a lot today about the structure of government and about different tools that you need to understand on how to move into those spaces and be an effective change agent. When we think about economics, it's not just simply about money. We're also talking about things like food insecurity and food deserts, where so many communities exist without the opportunity or access to certain goods that they need, and that is an economic concern. We also understand that poverty is racialized and feminized, and what that means is that people of color and women disproportionately experience the risk factors associated with poverty. And so that too is an economic issue. We're not just simply talking about jobs and dollars, but the impact of those components and the importance of understanding those. Social systems has a wide reach and touches so many different things. And when we look at how social systems work, we oftentimes see opportunities to increase the ability and the efficacy of a social system to be more effective. For instance, if we're referencing advocacy for foster children, as I mentioned earlier, we want to understand how the systems that work with foster youth or youth in out of home care, we want to understand how those work, and are they utilizing culturally empathic rules? Are they disaggregating data to demonstrate differential and disparate outcomes as it relates to particular communities? Are they in fact looking at the important things and the factors that create different outcomes for different people? And you want to be able to dig into the policies of those systems. You want to understand how the funding streams work. You want to get a good grasp on how the structure of the organization and the hierarchy of the organization works, because those are the most effective ways to be able to advocate for communities who are not necessarily able to advocate for themselves, or they are advocating for themselves, but their voices are not being heard. And we want to be able to capitalize on that. And that goes the same way for institutions. When we're looking perhaps at institutions of higher education or licensing bodies or hospitals and things like that, We want to understand how that institution and that system functions so that we can be most adept at supporting the needs of individuals who need our support. I want to let you know very clearly our passion is not sufficient to do the work that needs to be done for individuals who need this help. And today, we're talking about taking our passion and adding knowledge and tools to that toolkit because the work that we all want to do is so important and so valuable to the outcomes of the individuals who we want to help. And remember, sometimes advocacy is a life or death matter, very much so. For those of you who just joined us, I mentioned earlier, please don't hesitate to drop a question inside the chat line, as I will be doing my best to pay attention to that chat for questions and comments, and I will do my best to answer those questions and comments as we move through. When we talk about advocacy, we just talked a little bit about some nuts and bolts as it related to it, but we understand that advocacy can look many different ways. And one of the major overarching things as it relates to advocacy is what type of job we're able to do to ensure that individuals gain liberty. And whatever that liberty means for that particular community is important. And when we pay attention to the freedoms associated with breaking the bonds and the binds of oppression and reducing stigma, it comes to mind that we have to be knowledgeable. And once again, I can't underscore this enough in ensuring that the voices of those who we want to advocate for are heard. And there are tools and techniques to be able to do that, to ensure that you're getting the voice and gaining the knowledge from individuals who really are interested, who really need help and support. When we look at media campaigns, public speaking, commissioning and publishing research, conducting exit polls, lobbying to legislators and politicians, these are some of the ways that we'll talk briefly about today on how you have the ability to move your conversations into action. And I'm sure many of you can think of a million times where you spent chatting with friends or spending time on social media and you're liking posts and you're liking pages and you're sharing articles, but you still want to do a little bit more. You still want to be able to see how those conversations, how those discussions, how those social media posts have the ability to affect true change. If you're passionate about youth, if you're passionate about older adults, if you're passionate about a particular cultural tradition, and you have knowledge to help affect change, that's a key component to making the lives of the individuals better. It becomes debilitating when we sit and we're unable to affect change in the way that we want to affect it. Filling your toolbox with specific skills and tools to be able to do that makes it such that your talk will in fact move to action, and your ability to affect change in those communities that you truly care about, that you're truly passionate about, you'll be able to make those changes. And so when we look at media campaigns, which are very different from posting things on social media, when we look at commercials and we look at the ways in which individuals are either supported or disenfranchised by media, we have to be advocates to speak out against and for those protective and or risk factors. When you see an opportunity where an organization or a media company or a particular news outlet or broadcast is demonstrating insensitivity and further marginalizing a group, what can you do about it? Do you know how to contact the FCC? Do you know how to begin electronic petitions? Are you aware of how you can gain rallying support and crowdsourcing to utilize these functions and factors to actually change the conversation from just talk to action? Public speaking is not just about verbally speaking. We have so many different outlets as it relates to newspapers and websites and blogs, and our ability to share information and data as it relates to disenfranchisement and marginalization is really critical. Chances are your local municipality has a newspaper that is really accessible for you to write an op-ed piece for. Those are opinion editorial pieces that many people have the opportunity and the chance to write about and really create a buzz and create awareness and increase awareness. If you are in a community that is seeing the increase in homelessness as we see here in Los Angeles County, simply retweeting an article about it is not sufficient. It helps, but our goal is to determine how do we make it such that we create synergy. Synergy is when 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2, it's when 1 plus 1 equals 7. And these different opportunities in advocacy allow synergy to happen because we are deliberately creating opportunities that increase outcomes and increase successful outcomes for change. Commissioning and publishing research is a really, really critical factor. Right now, I'll share a little bit more on a couple of specific research articles that individuals have worked with and how you can see those things manifest themselves. But we're also talking, excuse me, about books and other things that aren't just op-ed pieces, whereby we are actually pulling together both qualitative and quantitative data to demonstrate that a problem exists. A few years ago, Michelle Alexander created this buzz and this movement to fight against the school to prison pipeline and over incarceration in America's industrial prison complex. And it was important because this was an issue that she was passionate about, and she spent years researching this and commissioning it into a book and publishing it. And now it is something that's being spoken about in a way that it had not been spoken about before because her advocacy work took her to a space where she was able to create a body of work that demonstrated a clear path to a solution for a significant problem. And she also created a historical context to demonstrate the importance of the work that she was doing. Conducting exit polls, being able to speak to voters and understand the issues, not just from the group for whom you're passionate about, but for groups who don't necessarily agree with you. One critical factor in advocacy is really understanding not just your community, as I explained before, hearing their voices for what it is that they need and what it is that they desire, but also understanding what people on the other side of the coin are thinking, understanding how you will be able to build up a cadre of knowledge in order to combat those individual paradigms and worldviews that make it such that the marginalization that you're attempting to fight against, to make sure that you are able to dismantle it. Because when you're hit with a contention or a voice that counters yours and you're not prepared to understand, or you weren't ready to even have awareness that that particular viewpoint or worldview existed, it really minimizes your capacity to really do effective and efficient advocacy work. Lobbying, once again, it's oftentimes by lobby groups, but it is an important form of advocacy where a direct approach is made to legislators on an issue which plays a significant role in modern politics. And when we talk about modern politics, we're talking about the outcome of those politics and policies and legislations that influence communities and influence the day-to-day lives of people. And being able to effectively work in those areas are very important. And as we move through this webinar, we're going to talk specifically about 2 different types of lobbying that are really important and critical for us to understand. Last week, the Washington Post presented this particular article, Where America's Future Prisoners Are Born, and it spoke about ecological impacts and risk factors associated with poverty, and how that increases disproportionately and exponentially the number of American families who experience poverty and the boys and men from that family that go into the prison and incarceration system. I bring this example for two reasons. The first reason is that this type of data, this type of research, this type of information provides us with a very, very clear picture on a risk factor and a condition inside of a particular community, inside of a particular culture of poverty, if you will, that has outcomes that are created that really live to move this problem through generations, creating an intergenerational paradigm. Many of us are interested in advocacy work because we want to break the intergenerational nature of marginalization. We want to dismantle the ecology's capacity to negatively influence how families grow, how individuals meet with success, and how people move through to a happy, healthy way of life. What we do know is that if we don't take issues like this seriously and learn how to break apart the individual components related to poverty, because as an individual advocate, it's challenging to tackle each and every piece of this issue and of this condition. But if we were able to identify very specifically a route and a component of this condition to address, and then bring along other stakeholders to support our advocacy work, it increases the likelihood that we're able to create effective change. When you're able to identify how poverty perhaps relates to undereducation and illiteracy, and how illiteracy is a major contributor to people of poverty ending up in incarceration, that may be an angle that you want to take. Poverty in and of itself is such a large issue and such a large condition to address that effective advocates are able to identify specific components of it and break it apart. This is another example of a media outlet and providing an opportunity for individuals to see a clear picture of a group and a condition that requires advocacy. When we look at this statistic that men who grew up in the poorest 10% of American families are 20 times as likely to be in prison by their early 30s than men from the richest 10% of families, we see a huge problem there, and something needs to be done about it. How are you going to do more than just post this article? How would you have the opportunity to utilize your social media platform or your writing skills or your presenting skills to take this article and bring it to life, to go into a community and write a grant for a nonprofit organization using this data to actually increase literacy rates, increase employment rates, decrease incarceration rates? How are you going to address the systems that engage individuals who live in poverty? How are you going to work with Department of Social Services and CalWorks and all these other groups to ensure that these families are getting what they need to really break apart this problem that we're seeing? And that's a major component of advocacy, is your ability to see the concern in all of its details and identify when and where you are going to do the work to advocate and identify and support these groups. When we look at advocacy and research, there are several different bodies of research and different journals that actually are pulling together knowledge and information to support individuals who want to do a more grassroots oriented research, to be able to say there's already a body of knowledge that indicates that this is a concern. We're not just going on our own words and our own passion, because that's not significant enough to be a strong and staunch advocate. When we look at research articles like this one from the University of Maryland, creating auspicious conditions for positive youth development in communities of color, this researcher may have been able to identify the ways in which urban youth and youth growing up in urban areas and communities of color are being disproportionately identified in media outlets and across different areas and being shown in a very monolithic light. What are you going to do, or what are you able to do using this research to contact different areas that focus on media images that create opportunities for these youth to see themselves in a different way, differently from the images that they're consistently being bombarded with? Mindfulness and compassion and human development, introduction to this special section. And this is looking at how we have the ability to bring in other non-traditional efforts to support the human experience, to ensure that individuals' development across the lifespan is created in a way where there are far more protective factors being introduced into their world than risk factors. We know that everybody from all traditions and all walks of life experience a variety of risk factors, and we understand also that many of these communities, have cultural nuances that don't necessarily afford them the opportunity to reach certain levels of care or to gain access to certain processes. What if you were able to take a body of research and demonstrate how you can bring things like mindfulness and meditation into communities where they don't normally exist? When I was doing direct services as a clinical psychologist for LA County Department of Mental Health, I worked with young people in South LA. And one time I remember seeing a sidewalk sale at the Manhattan City Beach Library, and I went and bought a bunch of yoga DVDs. And I was working with young girls and young men in foster care systems, and these youth began practicing yoga and breathing techniques. This was not just a service intervention. This was an opportunity to advocate for a particular group who may not have access to all of the health promoting tools that exist for other people. One of my students actually was able to learn how to regulate herself when she became dysregulated just simply by increasing the awareness of her breathing, a tool that came from mindfulness practices, meditation, and yoga. And finally, as it relates to research, another example here is developing critical consciousness or justifying the system, a qualitative analysis of attributions for poverty and wealth among low-income racial, ethnic, minority, and immigrant women. This is another example of how we are able to take information and create a body of work that demonstrates the need for additional support, the need for additional resources. What are you doing to not just have a conversation about it, but how are you increasing your knowledge base as it relates to these issues, as it relates to these concerns, as it relates to creating opportunities for success for individuals who have historically not been able to meet with success, oftentimes not as a result of their own doing. Many of these factors bring into account ecological concerns that have created or exacerbated the conditions in which they exist. When we look at lobbying, when we look at your ability to create opportunities for lobbying, it's really important to understand and differentiate between these two types of lobbying and the way that you, as an advocate, have the capacity to move in to these areas. We have, on one hand, direct lobbying, which is attempts to influence a legislative body through communication with a member or employee of a legislative body or with a government official who participates in formulating legislation. Grassroots lobbying refers to attempts to influence legislation by attempting to affect the opinion of the public with respect to the legislation and then encouraging the audience to take action with respect to that legislation. One of the most important things for an advocate to understand is that change cannot come into effect without understanding the system that needs to be changed. And what we know is that government systems, and many times they're responsible for the policies that exist that either disenfranchise or don't provide adequate resources and support for certain groups. We understand that the only way to truly fixing these issues is to understand the legislative body and to understand how these systems work, to know where they are and how to gain access to them. When I work directly with individuals who are looking to advocate, whether it's through grant writing or through media, I always encourage them. And one of my first questions is, who are your local representatives? Who are the individuals responsible for the policy making decisions in your particular community? And more often than not, the individuals are not aware of the name, the contact information, the meeting time or meeting place of the legislative bodies that oversee areas of their geography, or the areas of geography where the people who they are most passionate about, where they live. And this is a critical factor that individuals really need to pay attention to and take note of. So understanding how how your city's government is organized, how many different overlapping layers exist in your region, who are your local representatives, how are your representatives held accountable, where do the funding streams to your region come from, what part of government oversees the conditions for which you are most passionate? If you're passionate about poverty, do you know who are the key players in your county or your state or your city or your region that are working to funnel dollars in to address homelessness or to address poverty or to address the needs of the LGBTQ community or to address the needs of immigrant populations or to address the needs of children who are being abused? How are you able to effectively make change simply with the passionate conversation? It's not enough. Now, be clear, I'm not minimizing all the great work that you all are out there doing, but it's now time to step it up and be able to create action items and a plan that demonstrates how you will get there. And part of that is by creating measurable goals. For some of you, some of those first goals is to be able to identify who your representatives are in each of these particular frameworks. The reason why we're spending so much time on this government piece is because true change comes into play when we're able to get individuals who have the power to create legislative and legal and institutional change, to get them on our sides. Now, we're taking this framework as it relates to a government institution, but what I want you to understand is the next few things, the next few slides, that we discuss are also appropriate for an institutional lens, and I'll talk about how that works right now. When you look at your federal government and you understand, and excuse us if we have individuals who are joining us who are not from California and Los Angeles County, because most of the examples that we have here will in fact be related to Los Angeles County in California, but you have the capacity to do this and pull these maps for your own particular region. And these handouts are also attached to this particular webinar. And so you are able to download these and have a peek for yourself on who your legislative representatives are. When you look at the congressional district breakdown of the United States Congress, understanding what particular congressional district you're in, understanding who your representative is and how you can contact them directly. Remember, politicians and legislators are employees of our nation, and their job, in spite of what it may seem sometimes, their job is to effectively work for the needs of the people who they represent and the communities who they represent. And oftentimes, we focus strictly on national recognition and national politics, but today we're really drilling down to the different regions that exist in a particular municipality so that you can understand the different levels of access points that you have. In which district are you in here in this state of California? Who are the representatives for that particular district that you live in? When you look at the zip code map for LA County, we have a Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors that works for these different districts and addresses different things, and they address different things like poverty, like incarceration, like undereducation, like unemployment, like food insecurity. How do you know, or do you know which supervisorial district in which you live? Do you know the concerns on the ballots? Not on the ballots. Do you know the concerns on the minds of your board of supervisor representative? Are you getting on those agendas so that they understand the needs that you have and the needs of the people that the people in your community have? Many of these meetings are open meetings, and you have the capacity to go and learn about this particular framework of government. Many of our municipalities are riddled with overlapping systems of government that oversee a whole host of many different things, and it can be challenging to understand how all those things work if you don't take time to dig in and get it. Once again, if your goal is to be an effective advocate, and we're on this webinar right now such that you can learn the important tools to become an effective advocate, part of that is related to your ability to understand these systems of government and understand how they work such that you can insert yourself and, once again, move your talk and your conversation directly into action to create measurable outcomes for those communities for whom you are most passionate about. In addition to LA County being broken down into supervisorial districts, LA County, the city of Los Angeles is also broken out into city council districts. And this is a snapshot. Once again, these are all attached to the webinar you can download. This is a snapshot of an LA City district map, which breaks apart the different areas and communities in the city of Los Angeles. Each of these areas, each of these districts has a representative, and they are working and should be working to address the needs identified specifically in that geography. Now, let's be clear, these geographies have a variety of different and diverse problems and concerns. This is the bottom half of that map, and this piece of the map shows us who those representatives are for that particular district, how large that district is, and there are other documents attached that speak even more and provide additional information, which includes how to contact these representatives via social media, how to contact them via phone, how to contact them via email, and how to contact them via their offices. These are important factors for you to understand if you are attempting to fight homelessness. How are you being a true advocate if you are not in some ways either knowledgeable or connecting to the important factors of government that oversee that particular condition for which you are most passionate about? Los Angeles is also divided by subregions. These subregions are represented by members of the community, and they have meetings on a regular basis. And this was another opportunity for individual communities to say, our needs go over our or beyond our geographic boundaries. And we are looking to work collaboratively with another group as it relates to this need because it's spilling over different sides of the boundaries. When you look at what a council of government does, and that's what these particular regions are governed by, councils of government, it's a sub-region, and they are the council of government and the sub-region are kind of the same things, but they're a little bit different based on how they operate and based on how the policies come down. And this is also attached to this webinar. And they were formed in the 60s and 70s, and they focus in many ways as it related to transportation planning, but then they've taken a much larger approach since then. But even when you look at transportation planning, are you concerned about perhaps small businesses being disenfranchised as a result of an expansion of a particular transportation project? If so, how are you making sure that your voice is heard and that the voices of these individuals are heard? When you look at your ability to follow your dreams and ensure that you're being an effective advocate, when you're looking at the work that it is that you want to do with individuals and people, it is an ethical dedication to follow your dreams because the dreams of so many other people are being canceled right now. And we see that happening over and over and over. We have the ability to affect true change in that making or allowing it such that a family is able to see their children meet with success. a young father is able to get his child into a school that will provide him with the education and the opportunities to break the intergenerational nature of poverty, to break some of those statistics we talked about earlier of incarceration. A family is able to gain the tools and the skills that they need in order to get their children back from a system of foster care and be able to have them grow and develop in a safe space. These are some really important factors, but if all you do is talk about it, you're not being an effective advocate. It takes time and empowerment to do that. And that also requires a level of self care to be able to do and to have the ability to move into those spaces. When you talk about being silent, being a bystander, it's one of the most dangerous components of the human condition because we allow problems to continue to incessantly grow. We allow problems that could be addressed with some effort and some grassroots organizing and some lobbying. We allow those to continue down a pathway to where they grow and grow and grow and malign the people to whom they're impacting. What does it take to be invited to the table and be taken seriously? How do you convince stakeholders that your issue or concern matters? Why is your voice important? These are all questions that you need to ask yourself as you move through your goal and your idea and your desire to be an advocate. When we look at being invited to the table, oftentimes we're invited to that table because we have a set of skills and measurable tool sets that allow us to be effective agents of change. We're able to identify research and resources that create and affect true change. How do you gain those tools and gain those skills to truly and effectively advocate for those communities who are being disenfranchised? How do you convince stakeholders that your issue or your concern matters? Is you go and you identify these bodies of research that demonstrate the scale, to which these concerns are happening. When we identify in our small, isolated communities the impact of a particular condition, we don't necessarily see the magnitude of it until we dig a little bit deeper. How are you learning to understand the magnitude of a problem? Again, with the Washington Post article that we shared earlier on, we're looking at a whole host of factors related to poverty that increases the risk factors of a young man growing up in that condition by 20 times. If you sit with that statistic and understand how alarming that is, that's significant. But the next step is understanding not just how that incarceration plays a role for that individual family, but your ability to explain how that system negatively impacts that entire community and almost maintains a self-renewing system whereby individuals are continuously incarcerated, continuously existing in poverty, and consistently not meeting with successful outcomes. Having diverse voices represented in advocacy and social justice work is critical to bringing about true changes in communities and the world at large. Oftentimes, we've heard voices from a very monolithic set of people. We've heard voices from groups who have not necessarily been diverse and been able to explore issues in a very diverse way. We need individuals of all cultural traditions, of all affectional orientations, of all groups to be able to engage in this advocacy work. One challenge with diverse groups inside advocacy work is the fact that many diverse groups are experiencing a level of oppression themselves. And it becomes challenging to empower your voice to create a change because of the oppression you might experience. When we looked this summer and last year at the women's marches that went across the nation and across the world and the Me Too movement, we're looking at a group who is experiencing severe disenfranchisement across a variety of areas. And now we're seeing this particular layer of empowerment that allows individuals who exist on the other side of that on the side of that privilege in that area to say and hear these voices and become allies with these voices. When we increase the diversity of voices inside of an advocacy movement, we increase the capacity and space for allies, thereby exponentially growing the work that can be done. Societies evolve as a result of diverse voices who represent diverse perspectives and model the change they want to see amongst diverse communities. This is very important. The work that we do as advocates, there's also a level of modeling that we must focus on to demonstrate that we are not just speaking, that we are truly working as allies and advocates for the communities that we are passionate about. We are showing that the work that we do is important work. If you're a teacher in an under-resourced school and your goal is to increase resources for that school, your local work is great, but it's also important to take time to go to Sacramento or to support a group of people in Sacramento to create effective change as it relates to school funding here in California. To look at different other municipalities that some of you may live in where schools are funded by property taxes and how that maintains a system of poverty and undereducation in those particular communities. That's not something that can be affected at the ground level. That's something that we have to think big about and go elsewhere for. Here at Pacific Oaks College, we recently we recently launched our advocacy and social justice degrees for the reasons that we were talking about today, for the exact reasons to help people understand the importance of advocacy and social justice, and that it's not just about talk. It's not just about posting things on social media. It's not just about reading a book. It's about taking that data and that knowledge and actually doing something with it. Our degree here at Pacific Oaks College is a multidisciplinary degree program, and it's used and looked at to assess the general fairness of a society and the way that it distributes resources and responsibilities amongst people. And that's the foundational definition of social justice. Students reflect critically on how politics, education, and communication, and all these urgent factors negatively impact individuals. The goal is to effect positive social change. In order to do that, contemporary advocates must engage skillfully and knowledgeably at the complex intersection of culture, environment, and education that defines ourselves, our communities, and our institutions. When we look at what we do in this program and what you're able to do with a degree like a degree in advocacy and social justice, we're looking at the work of international humanitarians. We're looking at community organizers and restorative justice workers. We're looking at indigenous peoples advocates. And when we look at the consequences of colonialism, we're seeing hugely negative outcomes as it relates to those groups. We're looking at LGBTQ support workers, case managers, homeless family workers, and a variety of other careers that will benefit from having individuals who have earned this particular degree. And when I say earn this particular degree, I'm explaining that it is the skill set and the tools offered inside this degree program that make it such that individuals can successfully and effectively become advocates for social justice and advocates for communities that are oftentimes voiceless. Our advocacy and social justice specializations at the bachelor degree level include culture and communities and education. At the master's degree level, it includes legal studies, culture and communities, and education. We're looking at opportunities for students to really gain an edge. And as we read earlier when we talked a little bit about the history of Pacific Oaks College, this is who we are. This is what we do. We train people to change the world. Some of the coursework that you will be immersed in inside of our advocacy and social justice degree include a history of social justice reform with the ability to look at past movements and where they've gone, how they work, and the importance of them. Harnessing the power of technology and social media for social impact and change. How do you utilize media and social media to impact and affect change? How do you utilize crowdsourcing platforms and different components to do that? Advocacy in action is our fieldwork process where individuals actually go out into the communities as a part of their coursework to actually practice advocacy at an identified organization. Social media technology and social change at the BA level, once again, looking at how we're able to utilize resources that exist to truly affect change, particularly change in the 21st century, and be able to effectively source crowds, get movement, and affect true change. I'm really happy you all were able to join us today as we go through this process of increasing our dedication to the communities who we're passionate about. As we look to increase change, measurable change, not just conversational change, not just discussions, but the ability to see measurable changes in communities who are hurting right now. That is our goal. We hope that you're able to work with us, and we hope that you were able to gain some tools from this webinar in order to affect that change. Your homework tonight is to identify your local representatives, and your next set of homework for the next month is to identify a meeting to go to in your district or in the district where the community of for a community for whom you're passionate about, and learn about how that set of government works. You see our contact information there for Pacific Oaks College. If you have any further interest in what we're doing here at Pacific Oaks, or you want to come and visit, you want to learn more about our programs, you want to partner with us as an institution, you want to see if we can have our offsite cohorts located in a community near you, please don't hesitate to go to our website, www.pacificoaks.edu, or give us a call at 626-529-8061. Once again, it's been a true pleasure and honor sharing this information today with you all, and I hope that everybody has a splendid rest of your week. Thank you so much.